Okay, welcome AP Euro students. This is your Chapter 18 PowerPoint. This section of notes is going to take over where the Enlightenment ones left off. And we're going to really focus hard on Britain in this chapter. Okay? All right, again, natural rights being a big issue by Mr. John Locke. It's going to influence a lot of places, including the United States of America. Some of the things he believed in was equality before the law, basically saying that it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic position in society is that, the law is the great equalizer and that we should be equal before it. He believed in freedom of religious worship. Obviously, he's still a product of a world where religion causes so much tension and anxiety. He believes in freedom of speech, big one there, and freedom of the press. He believes that people should have the right to assemble, to basically put forth their issues with the government, because he believes the government serves the will of the people. He believes that people have a right to hold and own property. Why is that a big deal? Because he lives in a world, Europe, where the vast majority of people cannot own property. The property is owned by the rich people, and that is a minority of society. He believes that people should have the right to seek their own happiness. So these should all be very familiar to us by this point. Now, the theory of enlightened rulers, and we've been talking about our enlightened rulers, that they should favor religious toleration. They should support freedom of speech and press, and assembly as well. That enlightened rulers should foster the arts, sciences, and education, and they should obey the laws and enforce them. That's a really good four-piece breakdown of what it means to be an enlightened ruler. Enlightened absolutism equals enlightened despotism. Philosophers believed that only strong rulers or absolute monarchs had the power to reform society. And they believed you had to reform it from above, that the common people really didn't have enough power to reform society. And a new type of monarchy emerges in the late 18th century, and that is these absolute despots. How enlightened were they? Well, we've looked at that. And I think many of us argued that they were fairly enlightened compared to the absolute monarchs that came before them, and probably a big reason why society was able to be reformed. All right, now we'll focus on the Atlantic seaboard states, basically your Western European areas. France in the 18th century is a dominant power on land. England, however, is the dominant power at sea and a huge colonial empire. The Dutch Republic in the 1700s, 1600s was good to the Dutch, but the 1700s, the Dutch are a declining power, as is our other early colonizers, Spain and Portugal. They've become second-rate powers by this point. 1500s were great for Spain, good for Portugal. It's not the 1500s anymore. They're not the same old powerhouse that they were. Let's make this a little easier for you to see here. All right, in France, we'll just hit it up a little bit right here. The long rule of Louis XV, as you can see, 1715 to 1774 is a long time. 5 years old when he became king, and his Duke of Orleans served as the regent. And he is going to kind of pull France into sort of isolationism. He's not going to follow his father's footsteps and get into a bunch of foreign wars. During his rule, commerce, trade, and industry expanded. And in 1743, he's going to take, full control. But it would appear that, the Duke of Orleans was really good, and Louis XV is not that good. Lazy and weak. His minister and mistresses influenced and controlled him. His mistress, Madame de Pompadour. Loss of the French Empire. He lost the 7 Years' War against Britain, or the French Indian War over here, and he's going to lose all of Canada to Britain. And he's going to have high taxes, which is going to lead to more debt and hungry people. And he's leading this clueless life at Versailles. Again, he is above his people. He is separated from his people at Versailles, and he's clueless. He just doesn't get what's going on. Now, here's a famous one you may remember from World. King Louis XVI, the grandson of Louis XV, and he's unprepared to be the new king. He doesn't know anything about governing. He's like his grandfather, very weak and indecisive. Now he marries Marie Antoinette, and she is a spoiled Austrian princess who the people of France absolutely detest. And under their rule, the debt of France will continue to increase. They're on the precipice of a financial crisis. Here she is losing millions of dollars gambling. She had some serious gambling issues. And it's just another poor ruler for France. And we know that he's going to be so poor that the people are going to revolt and we're going to get the French Revolution. All right, here's the main dish right here, Great Britain. The Glorious Revolution happens in 1689, and so we're going to have no absolute monarchs in England. It is the beginning of a constitutional monarchy where Parliament will have significant power, sharing the power between the King and Parliament. And Parliament does gradually gain more and more control. In 1707, we get the formation of Great Britain, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, when England and Scotland's governments are united. No more Scottish kings and queens, and they're all going to be under the English umbrella here. Now, Parliament. Here's how it breaks down. The king chooses members to serve as his ministers, and then Parliament is going to make the laws. They're going to levy the taxes on the people, and they're going to pass the budget. As you can imagine, they indirectly influence the king's ministers. And so tax power is a lot of power. Lawmaking power is a lot of power. Parliament was dominated, as you can imagine, by the land-owning aristocracy. And you had two groups in Parliament. You had the peers, which was the House of Lords, your rich people. And you had the landed gentry, or the House of Commons. These are your rich people without nobility, without noble blood in their bones. Not exactly represented by your average person. But I suppose, to be fair, neither is American Congress either. All right, royal patronage, the means by which the king exercised power over the parliament. Well, he's awarding people titles. He's giving them government positions, positions in the church and royal household. So he has some sway there. This is politicking, these two bodies coexisting with each other. Now, how did elections work for the parliament? Representation was not based on popular vote. So it's not like the people of England are putting these men in position of power. And representation was not fairly distributed. You had these boroughs. Think of them as congressional districts in America. Parliamentary districts, which had parliamentary representation. Some of these areas had no members of parliament, and others had too many. It'd be like Cedarville having no representation in the state government, and then Sebastian County having more than they even need. We'd be upset with that because we wouldn't feel like, our needs were represented. There were rotten boroughs and pocket boroughs, basically politicking here to get certain people in power. It's like pork barreling in America. All right, you get the Hanoverian dynasty. It's going to come to Britain, a German dynasty. It began with the death of Queen Anne, who is the last Stuart. Protestant rulers of the German kingdom of Hanover are invited to become king of England. I found very interesting. There are three of them, and they're all named George. Excuse me. So that should be fairly easy to remember. George III being the most famous, of course, because he's going to be the man in charge when we have our little revolution in America. The first Hanoverian king didn't even speak English and certainly didn't understand the British system. His ministers exercise greater power, as you can imagine, because he doesn't speak the language. And that's going to give rise to the term prime minister. So here are three of the big dog prime ministers during the Hanoverian dynasty. Robert Walpole served for 20-ish years. Peaceful foreign policy, low taxes, growing trade and industry. Thank you, America. Then you get William Pitt the Elder in 1757. His policies of expanding trade and a global empire, this huge British empire. He acquires Canada and India in the 7 Years' War. So he's the flip of Louis XV, who lost Canada. You get Lord Bute, who was appointed by George III, replaced William Pitt, and George III wanted to exercise more monarchical power and patronage. So he is trying to get more power for the king. This guy here you need to know, John Wilkes, not John Wilkes Booth, who you all know and are comfortable with. He's a journalist, but also a member of Parliament, who publicly criticizes the king's ministers. And he does that because he advocates freedom of the press. Thank you, John Locke. He advocates the idea that law applies equally to everyone. Again, thank you, John Locke. He gets expelled from the Parliament, re-elected to the Parliament, then expelled again from the Parliament. And Wilkes came to symbolize liberty and the demand for electoral reform. He understands that there are so many people not being represented. And he believes that there has to be electoral reform there. And there's a picture of him with his liberty, whatever that is, staff, I guess. Kind of a crazy picture. It's a famous one. I've seen it many times. All right. Decline of the Dutch Republic in the 18th century. The competition for power began between local oligarchies. Oligarchies are, in this case, for the Dutch, it would be your business owners, basically. Remember, Dutch is very business. So local power, competition for power between local oligarchies, which is the regents versus the stadtholder or the House of Orange. All right, but remember, you're going to have an issue here with the Dutch being a republic. So, and I guess that's all we get. All right. So, political tussle between these two are going to be a cause of the Dutch being a declining power. They're going to, start turning into a second-rate power like Spain and Portugal. All right, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. There it is.